Well, hi, everybody. I'm Trish Marie, and this is the New Age Tour Guide podcast. Now, I'm talking today about living with one foot in two worlds. That's the essence of the conversation. And I honestly have to say that I think that this has probably been the most uncomfortable aspect of navigating my way through these age-changing times, trying to find a way to live with one foot in two worlds. Now, I think most of us are consciously or unconsciously feeling an incredible amount of uncertainty when it comes to the future. There are just so many things unfolding right now that are beyond our control, our immediate sense of control, and so many things coming forward that are challenging our sense of what or how or where to place our faith. Now, I'm not going to get into faith too much in this conversation, but if this is a conversation that's really hitting you, I want you to consider connecting with my Telegram group, where I'm going to do a 30 or 40 minute conversation around the human design themes coming forward for 2025. And faith is a big one. Faith is going to be a big theme that keeps recirculating through the collective this year, 2025. So that might be something that you want to connect with. Now, as these things are unfolding, I think in our own personal world, we're really coming up against the question of what or who or how can we trust anything? Can we trust anything? Especially when right now it seems like you can't go a day without opening your phone or getting in your feed or having a conversation with someone. And a topic or an issue coming up that goes right to the very heart of trustworthiness. Trustworthiness. Now, if you are anywhere close to where I've been over the last 10 years, you are probably taking yourself down rabbit holes and maybe even red pilling yourself in order to find something that feels like truth and to restore something that feels like peace, because our world is anything but peaceful right now. And I think that multiple aspects of our world is anything but truthful right now. And I think what we are finding is our minds are working overtime right now to be able to keep putting one foot in front of another, of course, to meet the day-to-day needs, but also to try and figure out what is actually going on in the world. Our minds are going overboard. The hamster on the wheel is just exhausted trying to figure it out. So this conversation of living with one foot in two worlds is also going to kind of tie into this idea of how do we feel our way into living with one foot in two worlds? How do we feel our way into what is truth and what is not truth? And how do we feel our way into where, who, or what can we place our faith in? So there's a chance that if you're very high likelihood chance that if you're watching this podcast, if you're listening to this podcast, you know that there's more going on than meets the eye. Otherwise, you would not be drawn to anything that is described as New Age. You have probably been red pilling yourself a little bit, or a lot, in order to understand what is going on in the world. Now, what I'm going to suggest, this is from my own experience, that no matter how forward-thinking you are, no matter how expansive your perspective has become, I think that there is still a point in our searching that we really begin to wrestle with how do we live with one foot in two worlds? What do I do while I'm waiting for the world to change? One of the questions that I had repeatedly is, what do I do now that I've been down a million rabbit holes? And now that I've consumed just as many red pills, what do I do now while I wait for the world to catch up? In this episode, I'm going to share my opinions, my experiences, my thoughts. That's all I ever share. I share from what I've experienced, from what I have personally moved through, and as a seasoned rabbit hole jumper and a seasoned red pillar, I'm going to share a couple of my thoughts around this idea of living with one foot in two worlds. So as we move from the video into the audio segment, I want to invite you to really tune in today and listen for what you need to hear in order to shift your mind and to prepare your heart and to hear from your inner oracle, your soul voice, about how and what you need to live more successfully with one foot in two worlds. So the first question is, what are the two worlds? The first question that's probably coming up is, what are the two worlds? And that could be described a million different ways for each of you, for me. And it could be described a million different ways over a period of time. So I'm just going to look back on the first 6 episodes of this season and say, you could be living with one foot in a world where you are seeing the potential that these prophecies and the prophets that have come before through the ancient traditions, there's some merit to them. But you're also sitting with one foot in a world where all you are seeing are false prophets. And I say that having been through a number of rabbit holes and looking at all of the people who were saying things that I thought they knew exactly what was going on, and maybe they did. Maybe they had nuggets, which is why I'm very careful about saying what I do know and what I don't know. So there's two worlds. Maybe you are seeing evidence of the prophets and the prophecies, but on the other hand, you're seeing a lot of false prophets. Maybe you're living with one foot in a world where you can see the value and the potential and the reality of the Aquarian values starting to come through from the age of Aquarius. But on the other hand, you've got a foot in another world that doesn't seem to be changing, and where you are quietly feeling like the odds will never be in our favor. You also might be living in a world where you are seeing that, yep, authenticity, that's exactly what's been missing. A greater degree of transparency and honesty and internal and external coherence. But on the other hand, you're also living with one foot in a world where everything reflects this sense of fake reality. And this becomes even more obvious to you as you step further and further out of the matrix. You might be in with one foot in a world where you are very aware, very conscious, and actively engaged in your own personal revolution. And you have another foot in a world where you're struggling to find other people who can even relate a little bit to what you're experiencing, let alone finding people who can relate to and get excited about the beauty and the power and the potential of a post-collective evolution. You might be living in a world that reflects faith and optimism and even excitement at the pure potential of this, quote, new age. And at the same time, you have another foot planted in a world that is mired in fear and pessimism and stone cold refusal to believe that anything magical at all is happening right now. Honestly, if we aren't feeling a little overwhelmed, feeling a little bit of anxiety, feeling even a little bit apathetic, maybe even a little bit terrified at what the divine is doing on the planet right now, and if we're not feeling a little bit depressed at times, If we are not feeling even a little bit like the world is actually going to shit, then we are not feeling what it is to live with one foot in two worlds. And I'm really going to key in on those two words, feeling and living. I was reading some of David Hawkins' work this week. You might know that name if you are familiar with the map of consciousness. That's kind of one of his most sort of brilliant snapshots that he left behind. But I was reading some of his work this week and seeing how it can help us reconnect with the contrast between these higher vibration emotional states and the lower ones. The higher vibrational emotional states, if we are spending more time in a world that is emerging, this new world that's coming forward through the chaos and confusion, in contrast to the lower emotional states, which are pretty much connected to this world that we are all very, very familiar with and probably see played out in the mainstream media on a daily basis. But as I read some of his work this week, I was brought back to the values and the qualities and the characteristics of the age of Aquarius. And something my most amazing friend, my beautiful, amazing friend, Allie Mackenzie, shared at dinner the other night. Allie mentioned that she uses David Hawkins' map of consciousness to help her clients evaluate where they are living. And by that, she meant what emotional state are we feeling more often than not? If we are living at the emotional frequency of fear or apathy or anger, we won't be able to hold the frequency of higher vibration states for very long. Now, of course, this all means that we are aware of what our predominant emotional state is. And not everybody is at that level of awareness. And chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're at least aware, if not consciously, taking steps to move yourself to higher levels on his map of consciousness. So if you are resonating with this, and if you're interested, Allie is my guest on January 25th for Soul Talk. And I encourage you to join us for the live stream on YouTube. And of course, the replay will be available on YouTube and in my Telegram group. But we're going to talk about, what she's seeing coming through the Akashic Records for 2025. And I'm going to invite her to unpack this conversation around living at a higher emotional state, living at that more often than not. But if I were to reframe what I heard when Allie and I were chatting, here's what I would say, is if you are living at an energetic level that is less than 200 on David Hawkins' map, the energetic level I'm sharing from won't be able to take root for you. Now, please don't get the impression that I'm never bouncing back down to the things like pride and anger and fear and apathy. I do. Generally, when I step back into having both of my feet in the world that you're seeing played out on the mainstream media. But it immediately compromises my energy level when I do that, when I don't live with just one foot in that world, as do certain environments. And yes, being around certain kinds of people will also really compromise my overall energy level. I have to be there in that world just like you do, but I do regulate how much time I spend there, both physically and mentally, because I know how it impacts my ultimate end game, which is to live at the higher vibrations of acceptance, reason, love, joy, and peace. And of course, authenticity, which isn't on his map. but I think it will be someday because some of the research that I've done suggests that authenticity is at a higher vibration than love. There's other research that's coming forward that says authenticity has a vibrational frequency of 4 times that of love. So I have learned the hard way that the minute we move both of our feet into that world that we see unfolding around us that is predominantly characterized by fear and guilt and shame and apathy and regret, we move below 200. But on the other hand, when we move above 200, something absolutely incredible happens. We open the door to pure possibility. And the moment that we stay too long in shame, guilt, grief, craving, regret, and hatred, that door shuts. That door to possibility shuts closed. Now, does this mean we never experience these emotions? Allie would say absolutely not. Those emotions are a part of the human experience. And I will tell you, I totally resonate with the truth of that statement from Allie. We do feel those emotions, especially when it's divinely appropriate to feel them. If we don't, we're not feeling and we're not living. If we don't grieve when it's divinely appropriate to do so, it changes us. If we don't feel shame when it's divinely appropriate to do so, it changes us. And if we don't feel regret and anger and fear and apathy and so on, when it is divinely appropriate for us to do so, it changes us. In my personal and quite painful at times experience, when we stay too long in these lower emotional states, it changes us. So if we don't feel them, it changes us. But if we stay too long in any one of these spaces, any one of these emotional states, it changes us. Now, I've found that when we play with feeling those higher vibration emotions like optimism, hope, inspiration, we empower ourselves to courageously consider and then affirm what's feasible for this new age. And we start to trust in the power of wisdom and love and joy, and we let go of living from a place of aggression or disappointment or regret. And we stop engaging in the blame game. Again, I'm only speaking from my own personal experience. I can only say any of this because I have lived this. And I still live this depending on which world I am spending more time in. Now, this world could be material, like a physical, real world. And more often than not, it's more of a mental game. And there's going to be another podcast episode coming up titled All of Life is a PSYOP. It's more of a mental game. It's more of a spiritual game. It's more of an energetic game. But as I close this episode, I want to leave you with one thing that really sparked my ability to start living more successfully with one foot in two worlds. The book or the movie series, Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Now, this book was written in 1959, and I believe it is a very compelling perspective on what's happening in our world right now. But beyond the core of the story, I want to invite you to focus on one character, John Galt, who is John Galt? Well, in my opinion, John Galt mirrors through this story two concrete pictures of two worlds that we could choose to live in and how we can live successfully with one foot in two worlds. Now, I almost entitled this post, this particular podcast, Who is John Galt? Because I felt it would send a clear signal to those who would already be able to get a hold of this. But as I worked through the conversation, I felt like the purpose of this segment, the purpose and the point of this particular episode was to connect with those of you who don't know who John Galt is. Those of you who don't know that Atlas Shrugged is showing us about living with one foot in two worlds. This show, this story, this movie showing us a parallel, really compelling parallel to how our world is breaking down and how there are so many people consciously choosing to place another foot in a new world that's emerging. Maybe we call it New Age, maybe we don't. A new world that's being built and consciously choosing to answer their own soul's call to move forward to be builders of that new world. Thanks for joining me for this conversation on living with one foot in two worlds. And I encourage you to consider what those two worlds mean for you. If this segment resonated with you, I would appreciate it if you shared it with someone in your corner of the world and subscribed on YouTube or Substack or Spotify to get future segments. Now, if you are actively living with one foot in two worlds, I'll also share a link to join me on Telegram. My group there is dedicated to strategic soulpreneurs, and I'm sharing more of my unique contribution to building business of tomorrow in this new age. Until next time, I'm Trish Murray, bridging some of the gaps for those who are navigating rapidly changing social, economic, political, business, and spiritual worlds, one podcast at a time.